From the very air you're breathing to the thoughts firing in your brain, our bodies are constantly doing these incredibly complex things without us even thinking about it. And so much of it comes down to two surprisingly simple processes: diffusion and osmosis. So let's dive into this essential balancing act that really makes all of life possible.
Okay, let's start with something we've all experienced. Imagine you're in one part of the house, and then suddenly you smell it, that amazing aroma of fresh coffee brewing or cookies in the oven. How in the world does that scent travel all the way from the kitchen to you? Well, the answer is actually a fundamental rule of the universe, and that's where we're going to start. You see, that simple experience of smelling coffee from another room, it points to a huge fundamental rule about how everything works. Things have a natural tendency to spread out. They don't like to stay all clumped together. And this isn't just about smells, this principle works on every single scale, from the tiniest atoms to giant clouds of gas in space. Just picture a really packed room, right? Everyone's bumping shoulders, it's totally crowded. Now, if you open a door to a big empty room right next door, what happens? People are naturally going to start moving into that less crowded space until everyone's a bit more evenly spread out. Well, particles, like the little molecules that make up the smell of coffee, they do the exact same thing. And this natural tendency for stuff to spread out, to go from crowded to not so crowded, it's got a name. We call it diffusion. And trust me, it's not just some neat physics trick. It is one of the most critical processes happening inside your body, right this second. So here's the scientific breakdown, but it's simpler than it sounds. Diffusion is just the movement of particles from a place where there's a ton of them, a high concentration, to a place where there are fewer of them. And the best part? It doesn't require any energy at all. It's totally passive, driven by the natural, random jiggling that all molecules do. So what makes this process faster or slower? Well, these factors are actually super intuitive. When you heat things up, the particles jiggle more, so they move faster. And if the difference between the crowded area and the empty area is really big, what scientists call a steep concentration gradient, then you get a much stronger push for them to spread out. Makes sense, right? Okay, so diffusion seems pretty straightforward. Particles just spread out. But what happens if we throw a wrench in the works? What if we put up a barrier? A kind of bouncer at a club door that only lets certain things through. This is where the story takes a really cool turn, and we get to meet our second key player, osmosis.
And this right here is the absolute key difference. Osmosis is a very, very specific kind of diffusion. First, it's only about the movement of water, nothing else. And second, it only happens across what's called a selectively permeable membrane. Basically, a barrier that lets water slip through, but blocks bigger stuff like salt or sugar. The water moves to where there's less water, trying to even things out. Let's see how this actually works for a living cell. So if we drop a cell into what's called a hypotonic solution, that just means the water outside the cell is purer, more concentrated than the water inside. So what does the water do? It follows the rule. It rushes into the cell, and that poor cell just swells up like a water balloon. Now, what's the sweet spot, the ideal situation for a cell? That's an isotonic solution. This is where the concentration of water inside and outside the cell is perfectly balanced. Water is still moving back and forth, sure, but it's at an equal rate. There's no net change. The cell is stable, it's happy. This, by the way, is why hospital IV drips are isotonic. And then we have the opposite scenario in a hypertonic solution, like really salty ocean water. Now, the water is more concentrated inside the cell. So what happens? Water rushes out of the cell to try and dilute the super salty water outside. This causes the cell to shrivel up and shrink. And that's exactly why drinking salt water is so dangerous for us. All right, we've met our two main players. Now, let's put them side by side, head to head, and make the difference between them absolutely crystal clear. This table really just lays it all out, doesn't it? For diffusion, you can have any kind of molecule moving around, and you don't even need a membrane. Just think back to that coffee smell. But for osmosis, it is only water, and it must happen across that special membrane. Their jobs are different too. Diffusion is for general moving stuff around, while osmosis is the specialist for managing water balance and keeping cells in the right shape. Seriously, if you remember just one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. Diffusion is any particle moving anywhere. Osmosis is only water moving across a special barrier. That's it. That's the most important takeaway to keep them straight in your head. Of course, they're not total opposites. You can think of them as being in the same family.
They are both passive, which again just means the cell doesn't have to spend any energy to make them happen. And they both follow that same fundamental rule, moving from high concentration to low. They're both working together to keep ourselves in that perfect state of balance. So why do we care about all this? Because these two simple passive processes are basically the invisible engines running the entire machine of life. This isn't just some abstract science concept. It's literally at the core of how you exist, moment to moment. I mean it. Right now, as you're listening to this, diffusion and osmosis are going wild inside you. Every breath you take, every bit of energy you get from your food, even the electrical signals that are forming the thoughts in your brain right now, it all comes down to these fundamental movements of molecules. Just think about it. In your lungs, oxygen diffuses from the air straight into your bloodstream. In your kidneys, osmosis is the hero that helps filter waste out of your blood. And it's not just us. Plants use osmosis to pull water up from the soil through their roots. It is happening everywhere, all the time. But maybe the most mind-bending example of all is what's happening in your head. What is a thought, really? It's an electrical signal. And that electricity is generated by tiny charged particles, called ions, diffusing across the membrane of a neuron. Your very consciousness is literally powered by diffusion. It's wild. And I mean, just look at the staggering, beautiful complexity of one of these cells that makes it all possible. On the left, you see a drawing from over 100 years ago by the legendary scientist Santiago Ramon y Cajal, and on the right, a modern image. This whole intricate structure is a machine that's built to run on the simple rules of diffusion. And what's amazing is that it was Ramon y Cajal who first proved that these are individual cells, not some giant continuous web. Each of the billions of cells in your brain is its own little machine, using diffusion to talk to the cells next to it. So, from something as simple as the smell of coffee filling a room, all the way to the firing of a neuron that creates a memory, we see that life is just this constant, delicate dance of balance. And it's all governed by these incredibly simple physical laws. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge, complex things in our world are built on top of such elegantly simple rules?